I was standing at the stove, stirring a vegetable stew that was already starting to burn slightly around the edges of the pan. I should have taken it off about 5 minutes ago, but I was thinking about it and missed the moment. No big deal, it's edible. At 72, I've learned to take these little things more lightly than I did when I was younger, when every culinary mishap seemed like a catastrophe. Outside my apartment window in Newcastle, the early winter twilight was settling in, even though it was only about 6 o'clock in the evening. Wednesday had been gray and windy, and I'd been at home all day, going through old papers that had been piling up in my closet for years, receipts from 20 years ago, instructions for long discarded appliances, Priscilla's childhood drawings. I put the last of them in a separate box. I couldn't bear to throw them away, even though my daughter was in her 50s. Priscilla called the day before yesterday, Monday night. I was just about to go to bed early, reading in bed some detective novel. I've already forgotten the title. The phone rang so sharply that I flinched and dropped the book on the floor. Mom, hi. She sounded tired, even exhausted. I'm sorry I'm calling late, but we have a situation. I already knew where this conversation was going. Over the past few years, I'd learned to recognize those intonations, that special combination of self-pity and barely concealed irritation. Priscilla never called just to see how I was doing, if I was sick, if I needed help. She called when she needed something. What's wrong? I asked, putting the book on the nightstand. We got the electric bill, Priscilla said quickly, as if she was afraid I'd interrupt. You have no idea how much it is. Clarence says it's because of the electric heat. It's very expensive, but we can't turn it off. It's cold outside. The kids will get sick. $840, Mom. I don't know where to get that kind of money. We have a mortgage. We have a car loan. Clarence's paycheck is late. I listened and thought about Priscilla asking for money to fix the washing machine last month. $500. And even earlier, in September, for school supplies for the kids. 300. Before that, for something else, I can't remember. How many times have I sent her money in the last year? 5, 7, 10? Okay, I said then, because I couldn't say anything else. I'll wire you the money tomorrow. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. Priscilla sounded relieved and cheerful. I know it's hard for you, but we'll be sure to return it as soon as Clarence gets better. You know we're doing the best we can, but these times. We talked for another 3 minutes, no more than that. Priscilla asked me how I was, and I said I was fine. She said she'd say hi from the kids, although it was quiet in the background, and I thought the kids were probably asleep or doing homework. Then we said goodbye, and I turned off the light. In the morning, I logged into the bank's mobile app and transferred $850 to Priscilla. A little more than she'd asked for, let there be some left over for emergencies. I had money having worked as an accountant for a small construction company for years. I'd learned to save a little, to save for my old age. The pension came regularly. The apartment was mine, no mortgage. The utility bills didn't eat up much. I could afford to help my daughter, though it was getting harder every time. Not because of the money, but because of the feeling that I was being used. But I pushed those thoughts away. Priscilla is my only daughter. She has 2 teenage children, a husband who is always in some kind of financial trouble, a house that requires constant investment. It's okay for her to ask for help. I'm a mom. How can I say no? I turned off the stove, removed the skillet, and transferred the stew to a plate. The vegetables were a little overcooked, but not critically. I sat down at the table, pushed the plate over, took a fork. There was silence in the apartment. Only behind the wall the neighbor's TV was muted. I'd lived alone since I'd divorced Priscilla's father more than 30 years ago. I was used to being alone, even comfortable with it. No one demanded to know where I was going, what I was doing, what I was making for dinner. The phone vibrated on the table. I picked it up, thinking it might be Dahlia, an old acquaintance of mine with whom we sometimes called in the evenings. but a notification from a banking app popped up on the screen. A transaction in the amount of $180,000 has been made from account number 4812. Payee, Harborview Realty. Transaction date, December 15th. I stared at the screen, not sure what that meant. $180,000? I hadn't transferred any money, hadn't bought any real estate, hadn't paid any major bills. The last transaction I'd made was a transfer to Priscilla 2 days ago. Fingers trembling, I barely hit the app icon to open it fully. Loading it seemed like an eternity. Finally, a list of transactions popped up on the screen, and I saw the last line. $180,000 went out today, Wednesday, December 15th, at 15 hours and 23 minutes. Payee Harborview Realty. Purpose of payment. Payment for real estate purchase agreement. My heart hammered so hard, I felt a throbbing in my temples. I wasn't buying any real estate. I wasn't planning to buy anything at all. A mistake? A glitch in the system? Fraudsters? I tried to call the bank, found the hotline number on the website, and dialed it with trembling fingers. The ringback tone lasted for an interminably long time. Then the answering machine came on. A mechanical voice offered to select the desired section by pressing numbers on the keyboard. I pressed 1, then another number, got confused, and the system took me back to the main menu. God, why can't I just talk to a person? I muttered, feeling the panic rising. I tried again, this time listening carefully to all the options. Finally, I got to the section for fraud and suspicious transaction reports. I pressed the right number, and the beep started again. Long, monotonous. Hello, you have reached the bank security service. All our operators are busy now. Please wait for an answer, said the same mechanical voice. The music came on, lingering and annoying. I sat in the kitchen, holding the phone to my ear and staring at the stew cooling on my plate. Time dragged agonizingly slow. 5 minutes. 10. The music repeated in a circle. Finally, there was a click in the receiver, and a woman's voice, already alive, said, "Good evening. My name is Sheila. How can I help you?" I was up all night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and replayed the conversation with the bank employee in my head. Sheila was polite, but unhelpful. She checked my details, confirmed that the transaction had indeed been made from my account, and promised that I could come to the branch first thing in the morning to look into it. She said that she could not provide detailed information over the phone. It was a breach of security protocol. When it started to get light outside the window, I got out of bed, even though my alarm clock hadn't rung yet. I showered, dressed, and drank coffee that tasted bland and too bitter. My hands were still shaking, so I spilled some on the table and wiped it off with a rag. The mirror in the hallway reflected a pale face with dark circles under my eyes. I looked older than my 72 years. The bank branch opened at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I got there without 15. There were several people standing at the entrance, all silent, staring at their phones. I joined them, shoving my hands into my coat pockets so I couldn't see them shaking. At 9 sharp, the security guard opened the door, and we pulled inside. I walked up to the receptionist's desk, a middle-aged woman with neat styling and a professional smile. "Hello, I called last night about a suspicious transaction," I said, trying to speak calmly, though my voice was shaking. "I was told to come back in the morning." The receptionist nodded, asked for my name and account number, typed something on the computer. "You will be escorted to the manager. Please sit down." She pointed to a row of chairs near the window. "Now you will be called." I sat down and waited. About 10 minutes later, a man about 45 years old, in a strict suit, with a folder in his hands, appeared. "Mrs. Tate?" He extended his hand for a handshake. "My name is Jeffrey Claghorn. I'm the account manager. Let's go into the conference room and talk quietly." We walked into a small room with an oval table and a few chairs. Jeffrey closed the door, motioned for me to sit down, and took a seat across from me. He opened a folder and pulled out some printouts. "I've read your appeal," he began, looking at the papers. "Last night, a transaction of $180,000 was made from your account. The money went to Harborview Realty, a real estate company. The purpose of the payment was to pay for a sales contract. I didn't buy any real estate," I said firmly. "I didn't buy anything. It's a mistake or a fraud." Jeffrey nodded, but his face remained unruffled. "I checked the details of the transaction. It was done through your personal account in the mobile app. Your electronic signature was used. Everything looks legitimate from a technical point of view." "How is it legitimate if I didn't sign anything?" I could feel my voice getting harsher, but I couldn't help myself. "Mrs. Tate, please tell me, does anyone else have access to your account?" he asked cautiously. "Maybe you've given someone your information or the right to use your banking app." I stopped talking. A memory from 3 years ago suddenly came to mind. Priscilla had come to visit me. We were sitting in the kitchen drinking tea. She said she was worried about me, that I lived alone, and if something happened to me, no one would be able to help me quickly. Suggested I add her to the system as a trusted person so she could access the account in an emergency. I agreed at the time. It seemed reasonable. We drove to the bank together. I signed the papers, made it official. "My daughter," I said quietly. "3 years ago, I gave her access to the account, in case I got sick." Jeffrey looked at me more closely, and I could see the understanding in his eyes. "Then the situation changes," he said slowly. "If your daughter is a trusted person and has legal access to the account, then technically the transaction is not unauthorized." "But I didn't authorize this purchase," I almost screamed. "She didn't even ask me." "I understand, Mrs. Tate," Jeffrey said calmly, almost sympathetically. "This is a really unpleasant situation. Let me check the details of the transaction, see who the property is registered to." He picked up the phone, dialed a number, and asked a colleague to check the information. I sat with my hands clasped together and felt a cold rage growing inside. Could Priscilla really have done this? Steal money from me? No, not steal it. She had access. But to use it like that, without warning, without talking to me? Jeffrey hung up the phone and looked at me again. "The property is in the name of Rutger Bassett. Is that a relative of yours?" I felt the ground go from under my feet. Rutger Bassett, Clarence's father, Priscilla's father-in-law, a man I'd seen maybe 5 times in all the years Priscilla had been married. He was widowed a few years ago, living in a rented apartment somewhere, always complaining about life when I heard about him from my daughter. "That's my daughter's father-in-law," I said absently. "Her husband's father?" "The address of the property is 123 4th Avenue, Newcastle," Jeffrey continued. "It's a suburb, I understand. The house was purchased yesterday. The money was transferred immediately, and the transaction was closed. I didn't say anything. It didn't make sense. Priscilla took my money and bought the house. Not for herself, for Rutger. Why? Why didn't she ask? Why didn't she at least tell me after she did it?" "What can I do?" I asked, looking at Jeffrey. "Can I get my money back?" He sighed, folding his hands on the table. "This isn't a banking issue anymore, Mrs. Tate. If your daughter had legitimate access to the account, the bank can't recognize the transaction as fraudulent. This is a family matter. You may need to consult a lawyer. I can advise you to talk to your daughter, find out what happened." "Thank you," I said, though there was nothing to thank. I left the bank and immediately dialed Priscilla's number. It took a long time, and I counted the beeps, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the fifth ring, the answering machine came on. Priscilla's voice, upbeat and cheerful, asked me to leave a message. I dropped the call, waited a minute, and dialed again. Again, the answering machine. One more time, and again. Priscilla didn't pick up. I stopped a cab, gave my daughter's address. The driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, nodded and pulled away. I stared out the window the whole way, watching the familiar streets of Newcastle flash by. I usually loved this road. It led through the center of town, past the old park where I'd walked when I was young. Now I couldn't see anything. Could Priscilla have done this on the sly? Take such a huge sum of money, my savings accumulated over the years, and just spend it without a word? On a house for Rutger? I tried to find an explanation that didn't sound like betrayal, but nothing came to mind. Maybe this was all a mistake. Maybe Priscilla wanted to surprise me. No, that's silly. What kind of surprise for $180,000? The cab pulled up in front of Priscilla's house, a two-story cottage with a small front garden. I paid, got out, stood at the gate for a few seconds. Then I pushed it firmly open and went to the porch. I rang the doorbell. Footsteps sounded inside, and the door opened. Priscilla stood on the doorstep in her house clothes, her hair disheveled, her face without makeup. When she saw me, something like fear flashed in her eyes, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Mom," she said uncertainly, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let me go." Priscilla stepped aside, letting me into the house. I walked into the living room without taking off my coat, without even looking around. Usually I always stopped in the hallway, hung my outerwear on a hook, took off my shoes, put them neatly on a shelf. Right now, I didn't care. "Clarence is at work. The kids are at school," Priscilla said behind me, uncertainty in her voice. "Did you want something?" I turned around and looked at her. My daughter I had given birth to, raised, put everything I could into her. Priscilla had always been a beautiful girl, and then a beautiful woman. Dark hair like her father's, brown eyes, delicate features. Now she stood in front of me with her hands clasped across her chest, her posture defensive, as if she were preparing to fend off an attack. "I was at the bank today," I began calmly. "I found out that $180,000 had been withdrawn from my account yesterday to buy a house for Rutger." Priscilla turned pale, then red. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mom, I can explain." Her voice shook, but she tried to smile as if it were some minor mistake, a trifle. "It's not what you think it is." "It's not?" I felt a cold wave of rage rising inside. "You took my money without permission and bought a house for someone who's not even related to me. What else is there to think about?" "Rutger is homeless," Priscilla said quickly, nervously, still trying to keep her tone light. "You see, the landlord of the apartment he was renting sold it, and Rutger had to move out. He was looking for a new place, but everything's so expensive. You know how rents are these days. And he's retired. He's on a small income." I was silent, looking at her. Priscilla looked away, walked across the room to the window, then came back. "We wanted to help him, but we don't have that kind of money," she continued. "Mortgage, loans, kids, everything's getting expensive. Clarence said if we bought Rutger a small house, it would solve the problem once and for all. He'd have a place to live. We wouldn't have to help him with rent all the time. And you decided to use my money," I said quietly, "without asking me." "Mom, you wouldn't understand." Priscilla was still trying to joke, but her smile was crooked, strained. "We didn't want to burden you with unnecessary requests. You do so much for us already. We thought it would be better to just take the initiative, solve the issue quickly, and then tell you." "Take the initiative?" I said it again, and there was steel in my voice. "You stole $180,000 from me. That was my life savings, Priscilla. Money I'd been saving for years, for old age, for emergencies, for life. You didn't steal it, Priscilla blurted out, and I could see the irritation in her eyes. I had access to the account. You gave it to me. That's not stealing. I gave you access in case something happened to me. I stepped forward. If I get sick, if I go to the hospital, if I need help right away, not so you can spend my money however you want. Priscilla turned away to the window, running her hand over her face. When she turned around, the attempt to maintain her ease was gone. Now she looked tired and angry. We thought you would understand, she said slowly. Rutger is family. He's the grandfather of your grandchildren. We couldn't just leave him on the street. Why didn't you ask me? I heard my voice shaking, but I didn't try to control it anymore. Why didn't you call, explain the situation, ask for help? Maybe I would have agreed. Maybe we could have worked something out together. Because you would have said no. Priscilla spat out the words sharply, angrily. You'd start thinking about yourself, about your money, about how you'd saved it all your life. You'd say that Rutger wasn't your problem, that you had your own life, your own plans, and we'd be left with nothing. I stood there, unable to believe what I was hearing. Priscilla continued, the words flowing, as if she'd been holding them back for a long time, and finally broke through. You've always been like this, Mom. It's always been about you, your peace of mind, your comfort. We live in constant stress, trying to make ends meet, and you sit in your apartment alone, saving money and not sharing it with anyone. Yes, I take money from you because I need help, because I have kids, a husband, a house, responsibilities. And what do you have? An empty apartment and a bank account you pray to like an icon. Every word she said was like a slap in the face. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. There was a strange, angry woman standing in front of me, accusing me of selfishness, of not giving her everything I had. Rutger is family, Priscilla repeated, her voice almost tearful now. He's my children's grandfather. He needed help, and we helped. Yes, we used your money, but you would have spent it on something for yourself anyway. At least it's good for people. Good for people, I said quietly, almost in a whisper. So now I have to give away all my savings for you to decide who to spend it on? Not on me, not on my old age, not on my needs, but on someone I barely know? You know him enough to know he's in trouble. Priscilla still stood her ground. But you don't care. You've always cared, except for yourself. I took a step back, then another. Something inside me snapped, like a thin thread holding me in place. I realized there was no point in talking any further. Priscilla wasn't just using my money. She thought she had the right to do so, that I had to give it to her because she was my daughter, because she had a family, because she needed it more. I'm leaving, I said. Exactly. Priscilla stepped toward me, her face contorted. You go, run back to your apartment, spare your money. We did what was right, and if you don't like it, that's your problem. I turned around and walked toward the exit. My hands shook as I opened the door. Priscilla's voice came from behind me, loud, almost hysterical. You're selfish, Mom. You always have been. You think only of yourself, and you don't care about us. We are a family, do you understand? A family's supposed to help each other, not hide money under the pillow. I went out on the porch, closed the door behind me. Priscilla's voice still came from inside, muffled but loud enough for me to hear the words. Selfish, greedy, heartless. I walked down the path to the wicket, pushed it open, and stepped outside. My feet carried me automatically, and I didn't even remember reaching the corner where I stopped and looked back. Priscilla's house stood still, the window staring at me blankly. The door was closed, the screams had subsided. I pulled out my phone and called a cab. I got home around noon. The cab dropped me off at the driveway. I went up to my floor, opened the apartment door, and walked inside, still keeping my coat on. I sat down on the couch in the living room and just sat there, staring at one point. My head was empty, as if all my thoughts had suddenly turned off, leaving only a dull ache somewhere in my chest. Priscilla called me selfish, said I only thought of myself, accused me of not wanting to help my family. But I did, all the time. Every time she called and asked for money, I sent it. How many times over the years? 10, 20? I lost count. I finally took off my coat, hung it in the closet. My hands were still shaking. I went into the kitchen, put on the kettle, took out a mug. I waited for the water to boil and thought about what I should do now. Just accept it? Forget about the $180,000? Pretend it never happened? The kettle clicked off. I poured boiling water into a mug and put a tea bag in it. I sat down at the table and wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth spill over my fingers. Then she thought of Dahlia. Dahlia Cram had been a friend of mine since my days as an accountant. We'd met on a course about 30 years ago, and we'd been in touch from time to time. Dahlia worked as a secretary in a law firm, retired a few years ago, but still kept in touch with her former colleagues. If anyone could tell me who to contact, it was her. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed her number. Dahlia answered after the third ringtone, her voice as cheerful as ever. "Gwendolyn, what a surprise! I was just thinking of calling you the other day. How are you?" "Dahlia, I need help," I said, and my voice treacherously trembled. "Something's happened. I don't know what to do." Dahlia became serious at once. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I told her everything, about the money, about Priscilla, about the house for Rutger, how my daughter used my account, how she spent my savings without authorization, about our conversation this morning, about Priscilla calling me selfish. Dahlia listened in silence, occasionally inserting short lines. "I understand, yes, horrible." When I finished, she sighed. "Gwendolyn, this is a serious situation. Your daughter has abused a position of trust. I know it hurts to hear this, but you need to act. I have a contact of a good lawyer. He specializes in financial disputes. I can give you his number." "A lawyer?" I repeated uncertainly. "It's the daughter, Dahlia. I can't sue her." "Yes, you can," Dahlia said firmly. "And you should if you want your money back. Look, I know this is hard, but what Priscilla did was wrong, and if you just keep quiet now, she'll think it's okay to keep doing it." We talked some more, and Dahlia dictated the name and phone number of a lawyer to me. Leon Fisher, downtown Newcastle office. She said she would call him herself, give him a heads up that I would apply, and have him set up a time for a consultation. When we said goodbye, I put the phone on the table and stared at my mug of cooled tea again. Lawyer, court. It sounded so final, so irreparable, but there seemed to be no other way out. The next day, Friday, I went to Leon Fisher's office. It was in an old building in the business part of town, on the 5th floor. I took the elevator up, found the right door with a brass plaque engraved on it. Leon Fisher, attorney at law. Inside was a small reception area where a young woman with a short haircut sat behind a desk. She smiled at me, asked if I had an appointment. I said my name, and she nodded. "Mr. Fisher is expecting you. Please come in." The office was spacious, with a large window facing the street. Behind a massive desk sat a man in his 50s, wearing a suit without a tie, with short graying hair. He stood up as I entered, extended his hand. "Gwendolyn Tate? Leon Fisher, a pleasure." Dahlia called, told me briefly about your situation. "Sit down, please." I sat in the chair across the table. Leon sat down too, folded his hands in front of him, looked at me carefully, but without excessive curiosity. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he asked. "Take your time, I'll write down the main points." I told him the same story I had told Dahlia, about the access to the account I'd given Priscilla 3 years ago, about the transaction for $180,000, about the house I bought for Rutger, about our conversation, about my daughter making excuses, blaming me. Leon listened, occasionally jotting something down in his notebook. When I finished, he put down his pen and leaned back in his chair. The situation is unpleasant, but legally clear enough, he said calmly. Access to the account you gave your daughter does not equal the right to handle large sums of money without your consent. That's important to understand. Access means the ability to make transactions within reason in emergencies. Buying $180,000 worth of house is clearly outside those bounds. So it's illegal? I asked. It could be characterized as breach of trust or fraud, Leon replied, depending on how the power of attorney was executed and what terms were specified in the contract with the bank. I'll need to study the documents, but in general, we have grounds for filing a petition with the court. I nodded, but my insides clenched. Court, application. It meant open conflict, breakup, scandal. This is my daughter, I said quietly. I don't know if I can do this. Leon looked at me understandingly, but without sentimentality. I've worked with family disputes long enough to know how hard it is, he said. No one wants to sue their loved ones. But let me ask you this. What happens if you do nothing? Your daughter has already spent your money without authorization. What's to stop her from doing it again? I didn't say anything. He was right. Priscilla hadn't just taken the money. She thought she had the right to do it, that I had to give it to her because she was my daughter. If you don't stop it now, Leon continued, they'll think it's okay to keep going. Maybe not on the same scale, but the principle will remain the same. You'll be just a wallet to draw from whenever you want. I looked out the window. It was raining lightly outside. Passers-by hurried by under umbrellas. An ordinary day, an ordinary life, and everything I thought of as family was falling apart. What do I need to do? I asked, turning to Leon. First, we'll file a claim for breach of trust and a demand for the return of the funds. He took out a notebook and began to write. We'll demand that the house be seized until the trial so that it can't be sold or reissued. At the same time, we will freeze the account to which the money was transferred. It's standard procedure in such cases. How long will it take? I asked. A few months if it goes to court. Maybe your daughter will agree to a settlement, return the money voluntarily. But I wouldn't count on that, from what you've told me. I nodded. Priscilla won't give the money back voluntarily. She thinks she did the right thing. All right, I said. Let's file a report. Leon looked at me for a moment as if assessing whether I was sure of my decision. Then he nodded and pulled a blank sheet of paper toward him. Then we'll start with the paperwork. I'll need bank statements, a copy of the account access agreement, any evidence of correspondence with my daughter, if there is any. Anything that can prove you didn't authorize this transaction. We talked for another 20 minutes, going over the details. Leon explained to me what documents I needed to gather, how the process would work. When I finally left his office, it was almost dark outside. I stood under the building's visor, looking out at the rain, and thought about what I had just done. I had filed a report on my own daughter, started a war against my own family. But there was no other way out. Leon Fisher worked fast. 3 days after we met, he called me and told me that the application had been filed. The court had heard the motion for interim measures and granted it. The house purchased for Rutger had been seized pending the outcome of the proceedings. The money in Rutger's account, the same $180,000 that Priscilla had transferred from my savings, was frozen. No real estate transactions could be made, and no money could be withdrawn. It's standard practice, Leon explained over the phone. We fixed the disputed property to exclude the possibility of its alienation. Now, we have to wait for the appointment of a court hearing, approximately in a month and a half. I thanked him and hung up. I sat on the couch and just sat staring out the window. It was snowing outside, the first snow of the year, wet and melting quickly on the asphalt. I thought about what would happen next. Priscilla would find out about the arrest. Rutger would find out. They'll realize I'm serious about following through. The phone rang that evening. Priscilla's name popped up on the screen. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I should pick up. Then I answered it. Mom, what have you done? Priscilla's voice was shrill, almost hysterical. Did you sue us? Seriously? Your own daughter? I didn't say anything. I could hear her heavy breathing in the phone. You had the house seized. She kept yelling. Rutger called, said he got a notice from the court. He's shocked. We're all shocked. How could you? I didn't seize the house, I said calmly. The court did, after I filed a complaint that my money was spent without my consent. What consent? Priscilla shouted. I had access to the account. You gave it to me. You signed the papers yourself. I didn't violate anything. You spent $180,000 to buy a house for a man I barely know? I felt a cold rage rise in my chest. You did it in secret, without asking me, without telling me. It was my money, Priscilla, my life savings. You're destroying this family, she screamed. You're ruining everything. Rutger is homeless. The kids are seeing their grandmother sue her own family. Do you realize what you're doing? I'm protecting myself, I answered quietly. The fact that you can't understand that is not my problem. Priscilla yelled something else into the phone, but I disconnected the call. My hands were shaking. I put the phone on the table, screen down, and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself some water, drank it slowly, in small sips. Then I went back to the living room and sat in the chair by the window. The phone didn't ring again that night, but in the morning, when I woke up, I found a long message from Clarence. He had written it during the night, judging from the time it was sent, at 2 hours and 30 minutes. Gwendolyn, I realize the situation is out of control. Priscilla is very upset. Rutger, too. We are all going through a difficult time. But please, let's try to resolve this peacefully, without courts or conflict. We didn't mean to hurt you. We really didn't. We're just trying to resolve this quickly, without burdening you with unnecessary requests. Rutger really needed a place to live, and we had no way to help him otherwise. We thought it was the right thing to do for everyone. I know we should have asked you, but we were afraid of rejection. Forgive us if you can. Maybe we can work something out. You take the application, and we'll try to get the money back. Not right away, of course, but in time. Please think about it. For Priscilla, for the kids, for the family to stay a family. I read the message twice. Clarence had always been softer than Priscilla, trying to smooth things over, to play the role of peacemaker. But behind all his words about peace and family, one thing was clear. They wanted me to back off. Take the statement, forget about the money, pretend it never happened. I didn't answer, just locked my phone screen and put it back on the nightstand. 2 days later, I got a letter. A regular paper letter, in an envelope delivered by the post office. I opened it at breakfast, took out a sheet of paper written in large, uneven handwriting. Gwendolyn, you are making a huge mistake. I am a pensioner. I am 76 years old. I have no one but my son and his family. You are depriving me of a shelter over my head, destroying my last hope for a normal old age. Your daughter wanted to help me, and you're turning it into a lawsuit. You are a cruel and heartless woman. I'll tell everyone what kind of mother you are, what kind of grandmother you are. People need to know that you're abandoning your family for money. You will regret it. Signed, Rutger Bassett. I reread the letter, feeling not anger, but something akin to squeamishness growing inside. Rutger had threatened me, promised to tell everyone how bad I was, tried to push guilt, to make me back down. I put the letter back in the envelope, put it in my bag. Then I called Leon Fisher. I have something you need to see, I said. We met in his office later that afternoon. I handed him the letter, and he read it carefully, then nodded. That's good, he said. Good? I didn't understand. For the case, Leon clarified, it's clear pressure on the injured party, an attempt to intimidate. We'll record it as evidence. If the case goes to trial, it will play in your favor. It'll show that the defendants are not remorseful for their actions, but are instead trying to manipulate you. He took out a folder, put the letter in it, wrote down the date of receipt and my comments. If there are any more attempts to contact you, especially with threats or pressure, immediately record them and inform me, he added. Any messages, calls, letters, it all works for us. I nodded. I left the office and took the bus home, looking out the window at the gray winter streets of Newcastle. People were hurrying about their business. Some were laughing, some were talking on the phone. An ordinary life where no one knew what was going on in mine. In the evening, Priscilla wrote me another message, short and angry. I hope you are happy. Rutger is sleeping on our couch now because the apartment he was renting has been rented to other people. All because of you. I read and deleted the message. Then I blocked Priscilla's number. I didn't want to hear any more of her accusations, her yelling, her attempts to make me feel guilty. Clarence wrote again a week after the first message. This time he was less diplomatic. You're a stubborn woman, Gwendolyn. We've tried to resolve this peacefully, but you won't make contact. What do you want to prove? That you are stronger? That you can punish us? It won't make you happy. You'll be alone, without family, without grandchildren. Think about it. I didn't answer either. I blocked his number too. Let them say whatever they want. Let them write. It didn't concern me anymore. Leon called me at the end of the week to tell me that the court hearing was scheduled for January 23rd, another month of waiting. They'll try to convince the court that they were acting within their rights, he warned me. They'll cite access to the account, the fact that you provided it. But we have strong arguments. Your lack of consent to a particular transaction, the size of the amount, the inconsistency of actions with the original purpose of access, plus Rutger's threatening letter. I'm confident we'll find in your favor. I thanked him and hung up. I sat down in the chair by the window, where I was used to spending my evenings, and looked outside. It was snowing again, quietly, softly covering the ground with a white blanket. I thought about how it would all be over in a month. The court would rule, and I would either get my money back or not. But either way, it would be the end. The end of my illusions about family, about anyone needing me. The phone was silent. No one else called. No one else wrote. I was alone, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't seem scary. Dahlia called me Saturday morning and suggested we meet. I agreed right away because I had spent the last few days all alone, and my thoughts started going in circles, coming back to the same thing. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on 5th Street that served good coffee and fresh croissants. I got there a little before the appointed time, ordered a cappuccino, and sat by the window, watching the sparse passers-by on the street. Dahlia showed up about 10 minutes later. She was wearing a long navy blue coat, her hair neatly styled as always. Dahlia always looked put together. Even at 75, she didn't allow herself to relax, to leave the house carelessly dressed. We hugged. She sat across from me, took off her coat, hung it on the back of a chair. "How are you?" she asked, looking me carefully in the face. "You look tired." "I don't sleep well," I admitted. "I keep thinking about the situation. I wonder if I did the right thing." Dahlia nodded, called the waitress over, and ordered herself a tea with lemon. When the girl left, she turned to me again. Leon says everything is going according to plan, she began cautiously. The meeting is set, the paperwork is in order. But I wanted to ask you directly, Gwendolyn. Are you sure you want to go all the way? This is your daughter. I looked out the window. Outside, it was snowing fine, settling on the windows and sidewalks. People walked by, wrapped in scarves, some laughing, talking to each other. The world kept spinning and everything inside me paused. I'm sure, I said quietly. Not because it's easy for me, but because there's no other way. Dahlia waited silently for me to continue. The waitress brought her tea and set it on the table. Dahlia nodded her thanks, but she kept her gaze on me. For the last few years, Priscilla only called me when she needed money. I began to say slowly, choosing my words. At first, it was small amounts, $300 for school supplies for the kids, $500 for car repairs, then more, $800 for electric bills, $1,000 for something else. I gave because I thought I was helping. That's what a mother should do. Dahlia nodded, wrapped her hands around the cup. But every time I gave her money, she didn't say, "Thank you," I continued. She'd say something like, "You know how hard this is for us, and we'll pay you back as soon as things get better." But things never got better. She called again and again, and each time it was a new crisis, a new problem that only my money could solve. I stopped talking, took a sip of coffee. It was hot and slightly bitter, but it was warming. Priscilla never once asked me how I was doing, I said, looking Dahlia in the eye. Not once. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she offer to help. Not once did she ask if I needed anything. She only called when she needed something. I was just a purse to her, a source of money, and I was tired of it. Dahlia sighed, lowering her gaze into her cup. I understand, she said quietly. It's hard, Gwendolyn. It's very hard when you realize that you are being used, especially when your own child does it. When I found out about the house, about this 180,000, I felt my voice begin to tremble, but continued. I first thought it was a mistake, that someone had hacked into my account, stolen the money. But then it turned out it was Priscilla. She took my savings that I'd been saving for decades and spent it on a house for Rutger. Didn't even ask, didn't even give me a heads up. Dahlia reached across the table, covered my palm with hers. Her fingers were warm, and that simple touch suddenly made me feel how close I'd come to crying. You're doing the right thing, Dahlia said firmly. I know it hurts, but if you back off now, she'll think she can keep doing this. You have to protect yourself. I nodded and blinked, chasing the tears away. We sat in silence for a while longer. Then Dahlia started talking about something extraneous, the weather, a new show she was watching. I was grateful to her for that, for trying to distract me from my heavy thoughts. We spent about an hour in the cafe, then said goodbye outside. Dahlia hugged me tightly, told me that I could call her anytime, day or night, if I was having a hard time. I thanked her and drove home. That evening, as I sat in the living room with a book I couldn't bring myself to read, my phone vibrated. A new message. I picked it up, expecting to see something from Leon or maybe Dahlia. But an unfamiliar name popped up on the screen. Tobias. Tobias. My oldest grandson, Priscilla's son. He was 16. I rarely received messages from him. He usually only communicated with me through his mother. For birthdays, I would send him money or gifts. He would send a short thank you, and that was the end of it. I opened the message. Grandma, I don't understand why you did this. Grandpa Rutger is a good man. He never hurt anyone. And you sued him and took his house away from him. Mom says you're cruel and only think about money. I'm ashamed that you're my grandmother. I don't want to communicate with you anymore. I read it once, then a second, then a third. Each word hit like a blow. Tobias had always been a quiet boy, polite, a little withdrawn. I didn't think he was capable of writing something like that, but then I realized he hadn't written it himself. Or rather, not only himself. Priscilla was behind those words. She was talking to him, explaining the situation from her side, turning him against me. Grandpa Rutger is a good man. You're cruel. You only think about money. I'm ashamed that you're my grandmother. I put the phone down on the table and covered my face with my hands. Something inside had finally broken. Some last thread of hope that things could still be fixed, that the family would remain a family. Priscilla had turned the kids against me. She told them her version of me, in which I was an evil old woman, greedy for money, willing to throw an elderly person out on the street for her own gain. I thought about what I could say to Tobias. Explain to him what really happened. Tell him that his mother stole money from me, that I was just trying to get my own back. But what would be the point? He's a 16-year-old who believes his mother. He won't listen to me. He won't understand me. To him, I'm already the enemy, the person who hurt his family. I didn't answer. I just blocked Tobias's number like I'd blocked Priscilla's and Clarence's before. Let them all stay there, in their own world, where I was the villain and they were the victims. I got up from the couch, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself some water. My hands were shaking, so I spilled some on the floor and wiped it up with a rag. Then I went back to the living room, sat back down, and picked up a book. The letters blurred before my eyes, and I couldn't concentrate on the text. I thought about Tobias, about how small he was. I remembered coming to visit Priscilla when he was 3 or 4, and he would run to me, hugging my legs, laughing. I would buy him toys, read him books, sit with him while Priscilla did chores. He called me Grandma and asked me to tell him stories. Where did that boy go? When did he grow into a teenager who writes me those words? But I knew the answer. He grew up in a family where he was taught that a grandmother was only needed to give money, that her feelings, her rights, her life didn't matter, that she should give everything she has and expect nothing in return. I put the book on the table, turned off the lamp. I sat in the dark, staring out the window, where snow was slowly falling behind the glass. The city was falling asleep. The lights in the windows of the neighboring houses went out one by one. I was alone, in the silence of my apartment, with the thought that I had no family now. Priscilla turned away from me. Clarence stopped writing. Tobias called me cruel. My youngest granddaughter must have heard the same story too. The same version of events where I am the enemy. Rutger, whom I had only seen a few times in my life, now thought I was a heartless old woman, and it was all because of money, because of the $180,000 that I had earned with my own labor, saved for years, planned to spend on my old age. Because I dared to say no, because I dared to protect myself, because I dared not give it all I had. I sat in the dark and realized that Priscilla had turned the children against me for good, that there was no turning back. The court hearing was scheduled for January 23rd at 10 o'clock in the morning. I arrived at the courthouse half an hour before the start time and met Leon in the lobby. He looked as calm and collected as ever, holding a leather folder of documents. "Everything is ready," he said when we said hello. "Don't worry. Just answer the questions honestly and briefly. I'll take care of the rest." I nodded, though my insides were tight with tension. We went through the metal detector, went up to the second floor, found the right room. The door was closed, with several people standing in front of it, waiting their turn. I looked around and saw Priscilla and Clarence. They were standing off to the side by the window. Priscilla was in a dark suit, her hair gathered in a tight bundle, her face pale. Clarence was beside her, in suit and tie, arms folded across his chest. Rutger stood next to them. I'd only seen him a few times in my life, but I recognized him immediately. A tall, slouching man with gray hair and deep wrinkles on his face. He was looking away, avoiding my gaze. Priscilla saw me and turned away as if I were nothing. Clarence didn't look in my direction either. I stopped next to Leon, staying close to them. We waited in silence, each in our own corner of the hall. Finally, the hall door opened, the secretary calling our case. We stepped inside. The hall was small, with rows of benches for the public, a table for the judge, and seats for the plaintiff and defendant. I sat next to Leon at one table. Priscilla, Clarence, and Rutger took seats at another. They too had a lawyer, a middle-aged woman in a strict gray suit. The judge entered last, a man in his 60s with a tired face and thin-rimmed glasses. We all stood up, and he nodded, giving us permission to sit down, and opened the case file. Gwendolyn Tate's suit against Priscilla Bassett, Clarence Bassett, and Rutger Bassett, he said in a steady voice. Subject of the suit: invalidation of the sale of real estate, return of the money collected without the consent of the plaintiff. He raised his eyes, looked at us. I asked the representatives of the parties to speak with brief explanations. Leon stood up, stated the essence of the case clearly and concisely. He said that I had given my daughter access to the account only for emergencies related to my health or safety, that Priscilla had used that access to purchase $180,000 worth of real estate in the name of Rutger Bassett, that I did not consent to this transaction, nor was I aware of it until after I received notice from the bank. Defendant's counsel then rose. She spoke softly, almost sympathetically, trying to portray Priscilla and her family as victims of circumstance. My client acted in good faith, she said. Rutger Bassett, an elderly man, was widowed and without a permanent home. My confidant's family tried to help him, but did not have sufficient funds. Priscilla Bassett used access to her mother's account, which was provided to her legally, to resolve the issue. She did not feel she was doing wrong as she was acting in the best interests of the family. The judge listened to her, made a note in his papers. Would there be any witnesses or additional material? He asked. Leon stood up again, pulled out bank statements, a copy of the account access agreement, and Rutger's threatening letter. Your Honor, here are the documents confirming that access to the account was granted for emergencies only. He handed the papers to the clerk, who took them to the judge. The agreement states that the trustee is authorized to make transactions only with the consent of the account holder, or if the holder is unable to give such consent due to illness or other emergency. The purchase of $180,000 worth of real estate clearly did not fall within these criteria. The judge studied the documents, flipping through the pages. Then he looked up at Priscilla. Mrs. Bassett, why didn't you ask your mother's consent to this transaction? Priscilla stood up. Her voice trembled. She was obviously nervous. I was afraid she'd say no, she said quietly. Rutger had nowhere to go, and we had no money to help him. I thought Mom would understand when she found out, that she'd go along with it because it was for the family. But you didn't give her a chance to decide, the judge observed. Priscilla lowered her head, silent. The judge looked at Rutger. Mr. Bassett, do you have anything to add? Rutger stood up. He looked confused, but when he began to speak, there was confidence in his voice, even some resentment. I've been deceived, he said. Priscilla said her mother was willing to help, that the house would be bought for me. I believed it. And now it turns out that Gwendolyn knew nothing. I'm not to blame for this situation. I was used, promised a place to live, and now they're taking it back. The judge listened to him in silence, then nodded. I see. Please sit down. Rutger sat down with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at me with ill-concealed anger. The judge flipped through the documents one more time, then put them aside and took off his glasses. I have reviewed the entire case file. he said. The facts are as follows. Gwendolyn Tate gave her daughter access to the account for emergencies. Priscilla Bassett used that access to make a large financial transaction without the consent of the account holder. There is no evidence that Gwendolyn Tate gave express or implied consent to this transaction. Consequently, the real estate transaction is invalidated. The monies in the amount of $180,000 are to be returned to the plaintiff's account. The defendants are obliged to reimburse the court costs in favor of the plaintiff in the amount of $3,500. He tapped the gavel on the table. This court is adjourned. I sat motionless, not immediately realizing that it was over. Leon leaned toward me and said quietly, "We won. The money will be returned within 2 weeks." I nodded. Next to me, Priscilla sobbed. I turned around and saw that she was crying, covering her face with her hands. Clarence sat beside her, somber, silent, staring at the table in front of him. Rutger got up, threw me a hateful look, and left the room, slamming the door loudly. Leon and I got up too, gathering our papers. I was walking toward the exit when I heard quick footsteps behind me. I turned around. Priscilla stood 2 steps away from me, her face red, her eyes wet with tears. "Are you satisfied?" she hissed quietly so the others wouldn't hear. "You got your money. You destroyed our family, made enemies of us. I hope you're happy alone, with your bank account." I stared at her in silence. She stepped closer and I saw in her eyes not only anger, but something akin to despair. "You don't exist to us anymore," Priscilla said, almost in a whisper, but every word was clear. "We are no longer family, never. You did this. You did." She turned and walked away, quickly, almost running. Clarence followed silently, not even looking in my direction. I stood in the empty hallway staring after them. Leon came up to me, touched my elbow. "Gwendolyn, let's go. There is nothing more to do here." We left the courthouse. It was cold outside. The wind ruffled the hem of my coat. I buttoned it up to the throat, pulled on a scarf. Leon said goodbye to me, said he'd contact me when the money was in the account. I nodded, thanked him, and walked to the bus stop. On the way, I thought about Priscilla's words. "You don't exist to us anymore. We're not family anymore. Not ever." She said it like it was my fault, like I stole the money, cheated, betrayed, like I was the one who ruined the family. But I knew the truth. She was the one who ruined the family. The moment she decided that my money, my savings, my life belonged to her. The money was returned to my account 11 days after the trial. Leon called in the morning to say that the transfer had gone through, $180,000 in place. I thanked him. We discussed payment for his services. He named the amount. I agreed. A few days later, I transferred the money to him, and that was the end of our cooperation. The first thing I did after getting the money back was to go to the bank and ask for a complete change of all accesses. The manager, the same Jeffrey Claghorn who had helped me in the beginning, listened to my request and nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Tate. We will revoke the old power of attorney and create new passwords for your personal account. Would you like to appoint someone as your new power of attorney?" "No," I answered firmly. "No one. I'm the only one with access to the account." Jeffrey wrote down my instructions, printed out the new documents, and I signed them. When everything was ready, he handed me a new bank card and an envelope with temporary passwords. "I suggest you change them as soon as you get home," he said. So I did. I went back to my apartment, logged into the app, changed all the passwords to new ones that only I knew. Then I sat on the couch and just sat there looking out the window. I felt strangely relieved, as if I'd taken off a heavy load I'd been carrying for years. A few days later, I went to the notary. I found an office not far from the center and made an appointment. The notary, a woman in her 50s with a neat short haircut, met me in her office. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "I want to rewrite my will," I said. She took out the forms and asked me to tell her exactly how I wanted to dispose of my property. I explained briefly. The apartment, all my savings, everything I have, should go after my death to a charitable foundation for homeless animals. I knew the name of the fund in advance. I found an organization on the internet, which was engaged in the rescue of cats and dogs in Newcastle. The notary wrote everything down without asking too many questions, drafted the will, read it aloud to me. I confirmed that everything was correct. I signed the document, she stamped it. "Are you sure you don't want to leave anything to your relatives?" she asked me cautiously, after everything had been finalized. "I'm sure," I answered. She nodded and put the documents in a folder. I paid and left. As I walked outside, I felt something inside me let go again. I knew now that when I was gone, my money wouldn't go to Priscilla. It wouldn't go to her so she could use it again as she saw fit. It would go to something useful, to help those who really needed it. Priscilla never called again, didn't write. Clarence and Tobias and Rutger were silent. The phone was silent. No notifications, no attempts to contact. I lived alone, in silence, and gradually got used to this new reality. A week passed, then 2, then 3. Life went on as usual. I cleaned the apartment, cooked my own food, read books, sometimes watched TV. Dahlia called occasionally, and we talked about nothing: the weather, the news. One evening, when I was about to go to bed, a message came. It was from my youngest granddaughter, Lydia. She was 13, a shy girl with long dark hair, who was always quieter and calmer than her older brother. "Grandma, I miss you. Mom says we can't talk to you anymore. She says you did bad things, but I don't understand why. I remember when you came to my birthday party and gave me books. I'm sorry about that, but my mom forbade me to write to you, so this is probably the last message. I'm sorry." I read that and felt something squeeze inside. Lydia was a good girl, kind, gentle. She hadn't really been explained to her what had happened. Just told her that Grandma was bad, and now she wasn't allowed to communicate with her. I held the phone in my hands for a few minutes, considering whether to answer it. I could have texted her, explained my side, told her the truth. But what would be the point? Lydia's a child. She'd trust her mother over me. Priscilla will still find a way to convince her that I'm to blame, and then Lydia will be in an even worse position, torn between us. I blocked her number like I'd blocked all the others before. I put the phone on the nightstand and went to sleep. I dreamed of Lydia as a little girl, about 5 years old, laughing as she played with the kitten I'd brought her for her birthday. I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest, but I pushed the memories away. In early March, Dahlia called and suggested we meet. The weather was warm. Spring was beginning to break through the last remnants of winter. We agreed to go for a walk along the embankment, which was usually not crowded on weekdays. I got there around noon. Dahlia was already waiting for me on a bench by the water, wearing a light-colored coat and a scarf around her neck. We hugged, walked along the embankment slowly, taking our time. It was quiet, only seagulls shouted over the water, and occasionally people with dogs ran by. "How do you feel?" Dahlia asked as we moved farther away from the bench. "I'm fine," I said. "Calm." She looked at me carefully. "Really?" "Yes," I nodded. It was strange, but it was true. I thought I'd be tormented, worried, blaming myself. But no, just calm. Dahlia was silent, and we walked on. Ahead of us, by the water, a few ducks were sitting, flitting from foot to foot, sometimes diving for something in the water. "Priscilla didn't call?" Dahlia asked. "No, she's not talking. Everybody's quiet. How do you feel about that?" I shrugged. I realize that's the way it's going to be. Forever. I don't exist for them anymore. That's what Priscilla said after the trial. And I accept it. Dahlia stopped, turned to me. Gwendolyn, be honest. You do not regret? Not at all. I looked at the water, at the ducks, at the sky, where sparse clouds floated. I thought about what had happened in the last few months, about how Priscilla had stolen money from me, how she'd made excuses, how she'd blamed me, how she'd set the kids straight, about how I'd given her money for years, hoping it would make her happier, that she'd be grateful, that our relationship would grow warmer, about how every time I transferred another sum of money, I felt like I was being used, but I pushed it away. Regret, I said finally, looking at Dahlia. I wish I'd done it sooner. Dahlia blinked as if she hadn't expected that answer. Earlier? Yes, I nodded. I wish I'd stopped all this years ago. When Priscilla started asking for money all the time, when I realized she was treating me like a purse, I should have said no then, set boundaries. But I was afraid she'd be offended, that our relationship would go sour. And now I realize it was already damaged. I just didn't want to admit it. Dahlia sighed, took me under the arm. You are a strong woman, Gwendolyn. Not everyone could go to such a thing. Not strong, I objected. Just tired. Tired of pretending that everything is fine. Tired of giving without getting anything in return. Tired of being comfortable. We walked along the embankment again, silently, just enjoying the silence and the fresh air. Somewhere in the distance, we could hear the hum of a ship. The sea was calm, almost mirror-like. I thought about the fact that I had perhaps years more of my life ahead of me. Maybe 10, maybe more. And those years I would live the way I wanted to live. Without Priscilla, without her calls, without the guilt she so skillfully stirred up in me. Alone, but free. We spent about an hour on the boardwalk. Then Dahlia said she had to go. She had a meeting scheduled with her niece. We said goodbye, hugged. She promised to call next week. I stayed a little longer, sitting on the bench, looking at the water. I thought about Lydia, about her message, that she missed me, that her mother had forbidden her to write. I felt sorry for the girl, but there was nothing I could do. Priscilla had made her decision, and it was final. The sun was beginning to sink, and it was getting cooler. I got up, buttoned my coat, and walked to the bus stop. On the way, I thought about life going on. No family, no daughter, no grandchildren, but it goes on, and there was a truth to it, cold and honest. Friday began as usual. I woke up around 8, lay for another 10 minutes, looking at the ceiling and listening to something rumbling behind the neighbor's wall. Then a child crying. Then the voice of a woman soothing the child. A young family moved in about 3 months ago. 2 small children. I hardly saw them, only heard sometimes in the morning these fragments of someone else's life, which was going on its own way on the other side of the wall. I got up, washed my face with cold water, and dressed in my clothes, an old pair of jeans I'd been wearing for 7 years that fit me perfectly, and a soft gray wool sweater, a gift from Sybil when she was alive. The sweater was worn, and there were scuffs on my elbows, but I couldn't throw it away because I had too many memories of it, and it was comfortable and warm. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on, opened the fridge, took out the eggs. I had run out of bread yesterday, and I didn't want to go to the store, so I decided to boil hard-boiled eggs. I dipped 3 eggs into boiling water, clocked 10 minutes on the phone timer, and went to the window again. While the eggs were boiling, I stood and looked outside, watching the usual morning bustle. Downstairs, my 5th-floor neighbor, a full woman in her 60s, with a short gray haircut, was walking her spaniel. The dog was red, shaggy, with long ears that dragged on the ground as it sniffed at every bush. The woman walked slowly, yanked the leash whenever the dog pulled too hard, said something to it softly, leaned over, and corrected its collar. This scene repeated itself every morning at about the same time, between 8:30 and 8, and I had gotten so used to it that I even found it comforting. Stability, predictability, the dog, the woman, the morning walk. It was like yesterday, like the day before, like tomorrow. The timer on my phone rang abruptly. I flinched, went back to the stove. I poured the boiling water into the sink. A jet of steam rose up, showering my face with wet warmth. I poured cold tap water over the eggs, waited 3 minutes for them to cool enough to hold in my hands. I peeled them carefully, trying not to damage the whites, salted them from the salt shaker on the table, ate them at the table by the window, drinking hot tea without sugar. My phone was lying next to me on the table. I picked it up, looked at the screen. No notifications, no missed calls. The last message had been from Dahlia 3 days ago. She'd sent a picture of some flower in her garden, a daffodil, I think, and wrote briefly, "Spring had come after all." I answered her then with one word, "Beautiful." Dahlia never wrote again, and neither did I. We saw each other often enough, meeting on walks or in cafes once a week, that we didn't need constant correspondence. After breakfast, I cleared the table, rinsed my plate and cup under the faucet, and wiped the countertop with a damp cloth. I swept the crumbs into the palm of my hand and tossed them into the trash can under the sink. Then she went into the living room and looked around, assessing what needed to be done. There were old newspapers on the coffee table that I hadn't thrown out in the last week, and dust on the shelf above the TV, visible in the morning light from the window. I took a rag out of the kitchen cabinet, went back, wiped the shelves methodically from left to right, then gathered the newspapers into an uneven pile and took them to the kitchen, stuffed them in a garbage bag. The clock on the wall read 10:30. The whole day ahead of her, long and empty and nothing much to do. Before, when Priscilla was still calling, I would have planned something for the day. Maybe a trip to visit her, a meeting with some old acquaintances, a trip to the big supermarket on the outskirts of town for a week's worth of groceries. There was nothing to plan now. The days were the same, empty, and I filled them with small household chores that required no effort or thought. I sat down on the couch, picked up the book I'd started reading a week ago, and still hadn't gotten through half of it. It was a detective story, something about a murder in a small provincial town where everyone knew each other and everyone suspected each other. I read slowly, often distracted, caught myself that I returned to the same page 3 times because I do not remember what was written. The plot was predictable, but it didn't annoy me, just a way to pass the time, to fill the silence. Around noon, the phone rang. I flinched in surprise, put the book aside, and picked it up. Dahlia's name popped up on the screen. I answered it, holding the phone to my ear. "Gwendolyn, hello?" Dahlia's voice was cheerful, energetic, as always. "Did not wake you up?" "No, I got up long ago." I leaned back on the back of the couch. "What's wrong?" "Nothing happened. I just wanted to talk to you, to see how you were doing." Dahlia paused. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied. The usual. "Listen, I was thinking, maybe we could meet tonight?" Dahlia suggested it. "The weather's nice, it's not cold, we can walk along the promenade, or we could go to a cafe if you want." I thought about it, looking out the window. I didn't really want to leave the apartment. I just wanted to stay home and be quiet. But I didn't want to say no to Dahlia either. She was the only person who kept in touch with me after everything that had happened, and I appreciated that more than I could put into words. "Okay," I finally agreed. "What time?" "6 o'clock? I'll meet you at the waterfront, where I always did, by those benches by the old pier." "It's a deal." We said goodbye. I put the phone down on the table. "So we're going out tonight." "That's good. I'll get out of the apartment, get some fresh air, look at the water." I hadn't been out much the last few days, only once to the store around the corner when I ran out of milk and eggs. The rest of the day went by in a familiar routine. I heated up the rest of yesterday's soup for lunch, ate it slowly, looking out the window, then washed my plate and lay down on the couch to rest. I dozed off almost immediately, woke up around 4 with a heavy head and an unpleasant dryness in my mouth. I got up, drank a glass of cold tap water, washed my face, and felt better almost immediately. At about 6:30, I started to get ready. I changed into dark pants and a light jacket, took my bag, checked if my wallet and keys were in it. I left the apartment at 26 sharp so as not to be late. It was cool outside, but not cold. The wind was blowing light, almost imperceptible, pleasant. I walked slowly, not hurrying, along the familiar streets, watching the people around me. Some were hurrying somewhere, looking at their phones as they walked. Some were walking with their children, holding their hands. Some were just standing in front of a store, talking on the phone, gesturing with their free hand. Dahlia was already waiting for me on a bench by the water when I approached. She was wearing a light spring coat, her hair neatly styled as always. We hugged briefly, then sat next to each other on the bench. "How are you?" Dahlia asked, turning to me and looking intently at my face, as if she were trying to read something between the lines. "I'm fine," I answered. "Just the same. And how are things with Priscilla? Has she called you?" "No." I shook my head. "She hasn't. It's been over a month." Dahlia sighed softly, looked at the water. "How do you feel about that? Isn't it hard?" I looked at the water, too. The waves were lapping against the shore, one after another, quiet, almost silent. Seagulls circled high over the water, sometimes diving down sharply, snatching something out of the water with their beaks, then soaring back up. "Calmly," I said after a pause. "I realize that this is how it will be now. Forever. Don't you regret what you did?" Dahlia turned to me fully. "No regrets at all?" I pondered her question. Do I regret it? What exactly do I regret? That I lost my daughter? But I hadn't lost her, because what I thought was a daughter, a mother and a daughter in the normal sense of those words, didn't really exist. It was an illusion, a beautiful picture that I had stubbornly believed in for years, not wanting to see the truth. "I regret it," I said slowly, "but not what you're thinking. I wish I'd done it sooner, for putting up with it for so long, that I gave her the money over and over again, hoping each time that it would make a difference, that she would finally understand, appreciate it." Dahlia nodded without interrupting. "I understand you." We sat in silence for a few minutes, just looking at the water and listening to the sounds around us. A young couple with a large dog, a sheepdog, walked by. Then a boy of about 10 on a bright blue scooter ran past, almost hitting us. Life went on around me, indifferent to my problems, to my worries. "You know, Gwendolyn," Dahlia said after a while, "I'm proud of you, really proud. Not every person could do that, to go against his own daughter, to protect himself." "I'm just tired," I answered honestly, turning to her. "Tired of being comfortable. Tired of giving and getting nothing in return." Dahlia reached out and squeezed my hand. "You're a strong woman." We spent another 40 minutes on the embankment, talking about various things: the weather, some news Dahlia had seen on TV, her niece who was getting married. Then Dahlia looked at her watch and said she had to go, and promised to stop by her son's house for dinner. We said goodbye at the bench, hugged again, agreed to call next week for sure. I returned home slowly when the streets were starting to empty and it was getting dark. I went up to the apartment, took off my jacket, hung it neatly in the hall closet. I went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, looked through the contents. There was some chicken fillet left, which I had bought 3 days ago, carrots, zucchini, sweet peppers. I took everything out, put it on a cutting board, and started chopping. Carrots in neat cubes, as my mother once taught me, zucchini in thin slices, peppers in long strips. I cut the chicken into small pieces, fried it in a pan with oil until golden, added the vegetables, salted, peppered, and covered with a lid. While everything was cooking, I set the table. One plate, one set of utensils, one napkin. It still felt unfamiliar to me, even though it had been so long since I'd started living on my own for real. I used to always cook in stock, making big pots of soup, baking pies for days, making salads in case Priscilla and her family came over, or I went to their place and brought something with me. Now I was strictly a one-pot cook, just for myself. I ate slowly, chewing each bite slowly, then washed the plate and frying pan and wiped the table clean. She went into the living room, turned on the TV, flipped through the channels without much interest. I stopped on some old movie, black and white, with actors whose names I didn't know. A melodrama about love, separation, reunion. Predictable plot, beautiful words, happy ending. I watched it half-heartedly, not really getting into the details. No one rang the doorbell all evening. The phone was silent, lying on the table with the dark screen facing down. I sat alone in my apartment, and it was normal, familiar. There were no more calls with endless requests for money, no more pressure, manipulation, guilt, just silence and a calmness I hadn't expected to appreciate so much. I got up when the movie was over, walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on. As the water boiled slowly, I stood at the window and looked out at the street below. The street lights had long since been lit, illuminating the empty sidewalks with a soft yellow glow. A few people walked by occasionally, hurrying home after work or from somewhere else. The city was falling asleep gradually, preparing for the night. The kettle clicked on, shutting off. I poured hot water into a cup, dropped in a chamomile tea bag, which I loved for its mild flavor, and waited about 3 minutes for it to brew properly. I took out the bag, squeezed it with a spoon on the edge of the cup, threw it away. I added a spoonful of honey and stirred, watching it dissolve, leaving golden streaks. I returned to the living room with the cup in my hands, sat down in my favorite chair by the window, which overlooked almost the entire street. I sipped my tea, burning a little, and remembered how once, long ago, when I was young, I had dreamed of a large, friendly family, about how we would gather together at the festive table, me, my husband, daughter, son-in-law, grandchildren, how we would laugh, tell stories, share news, how the grandchildren will come running to me, hugging me, asking me to read a story or bake something delicious. A beautiful picture, almost like a movie, like that movie that just ended on the screen. I grinned, looking at my vague reflection in the dark glass of the window. Reality was very different, simpler and more cynical. No festive tables, no cozy evenings, no warm hugs, only endless requests for money, manipulation, use. Priscilla didn't see me as a mother, the person who gave birth to her, raised her, gave her everything she could. She saw a source of money, an ATM machine to turn to whenever she needed funds. Now I had what I had. Money in my account, silence in my apartment, no pressure or manipulation, no illusions, no expectations. Priscilla had made her choice then when she stole my money and spent it without authorization. I made mine when I sued and got back what belonged to me. No regrets, no forgiveness. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't admit fault, didn't try to understand my side. So there was no one to forgive and nothing to forgive for. I finished the last sip of my tea, set the empty cup on the windowsill. It was dark outside the window, the sky black with sparse stars. The street was almost empty, with only the occasional car passing by. Quiet, lonely, but honest. I was no longer fooling myself with beautiful illusions. This was not the life I had dreamed of when I was young, but it was mine, only mine, and that was enough.